Hello, I'm Amy Hickman, and this is for TESP 350. And today I will be talking about the three questions. The first question is, students sometimes speak with dialects or differences in language that are related to their culture. What is your professional opinion on how these differences impact assessment approaches in oral language? There were three types of errors listed in our book. The first one, professionals can assume that all students from diverse groups are normal dialect speakers and thus fail to assess their language competence. I think this, in my opinion, just boils down to professionals conducting the assessment must be knowledgeable and understand that the development of the dialect-sensitive or culture-fair language test has not kept up with the times. I mean, we have way more diversity than we have in the past, so I don't think our assessments have kept up with all of the differences. And that, I think, that it also recommended in the book to rely on informal procedures and possibly collect spontaneous speech samples from naturalistic settings. I think that makes a lot more sense if you can use informal procedures, because students are going to be more relaxed than they are if you're going to be testing or things like that, and I think it would be easier to see where they're at in their oral language. If the second thing the text talked about was, if students are assessed, professionals can overcompensate for dialect and assume that true disorders are dialectical characteristics. And then the third one was, professionals can undercompensate for dialect and mistake dialect differences for language disorders. So here again, it's the professionals conducting the assessments must understand or know that these assessments aren't taking in account for the dialect. So again, I would recommend relying on the informal procedures. And the second one, what intervention options are available to students who are English learners if they need additional services? In the text, it talked about bilingual education programs, ESL or ESOL programs, and I think these would be great, but like the doctor, I don't remember where she was from, mentioned in the videos, is that I'm not positive, but I can't imagine that there's very many bilingual education programs. I know in our small schools around here we don't have any, and I know for sure that the special education teachers aren't bilingual. So I think that's a disadvantage. But I know some other things is like the SIOP model, the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol model. It is composed of 30 research-based features of instruction geared toward improving the achievement of English learners. We've done extensive things with the SIOP model in other classes for a degree, and I know I've learned a lot about differentiating instruction and all that for English learners through the SIOP model. So I think that's a good place to go to. And then some other things that can be used. Teachers can use gestures to try to help make the lesson more understandable. Modeling, visual aids, or graphic organizers. Repeating key vocabulary. I know another option was, I think it's in the SIOP model too, is to put the vocabulary up on the board, or give vocabulary at the beginning of the lesson and hand it out and talk about it before you even discuss the lesson. Key vocabulary is a real high item for teaching English learners. Slowing down speech, like with this video, if we talk really fast, and they're not going to be able to catch on as well as if we slow it down and make sure we're saying the words we want to be saying. And then scaffolding instruction, building background knowledge. Obviously, students come from all different backgrounds. Some students have big families, some have little families, some are adopted and don't have any of that family background. It's just they have all different learning, all different backgrounds to learn from. So we just have to help build on that, and then to help them understand the lessons. Repetition and practice. For English learners, it's all about doing it over and over again and putting it in practice. A good way to do that, I know they talked about, was having students have big discussions, then have small group discussions, and then have partner discussions, and then the students can finally go out on their own and do it themselves. And the last question, why are students who are culturally, linguistically diverse, sometimes over or under identified for special education services? In our book, it talks about how research suggests that students' race and ethnicity can significantly influence the chances of being misidentified as meeting the criteria for special needs services due to the fact a lot of the characteristics are the same. And this can cause short and long-term negative effects on the students. So for the under-identified, they talked about assuming the students are not meeting their expectations due to language barrier. So they may not be being referred for special education services because the teachers or staff just think that they're not getting the grades they should be getting because they're not understanding English. So instead of referring them for special services, they may just be trying, which we'll talk about here in a second, is not had enough time learning their English. So informal district rules may include to not refer a student that hasn't had a certain number of years learning English. So I know in the book it talked about some criteria not being understood correctly or misinterpreted, and so some just think that they need, say it's a first grader, and they think, well, they've only been speaking English or learning English for 2 years, so we'll wait until they're in second, third grade, and then they get so far behind. And then some believe in language support before learning disability support. So they think if they can't speak English or understand the English, then that needs to be addressed before they look for a learning disability or to help support them with a learning disability. And then over-identified, some can be referred too quickly based on the characteristics that mimic a learning disability characteristic, and that's what we talked about before, was a lot of them can go hand in hand and they look like each other. Then do not have assessments that are culturally or linguistically correct for each student, which I talked about this before also, is that the times haven't kept up with the diversity of our students. So we don't have assessments that, even if the student speaks Spanish and the assessment's in Spanish, it may not be the correct dialect, or it may not be the same. There's different Englishes, there's different Spanishes, and it's just the assessments haven't kept up. Students that have missed large chunks of instruction, and they talked about, say, like an adult or someone returning to school after a long gap of time, and they're obviously lacking compared to their peers. They may be referred for special learning circumstances, like they think they should be in a smaller class with more attention instead of, and they may be placed in there instead of being referred for a learning disability just for the fact that they have a large gap and they need to be in a more smaller class with more hands-on. So that is my discussion. Thank you.